Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. We're going to be talking about a very influential person on the right. I would say his ghost is sort of in the room at a time like this when Republicans are trying to figure out where to turn from here and what's next. This is a guy who was in charge of Breitbart.com at some point after the death of Andrew Breitbart, and first came on my radar around the time that Trump first ran for president, when Bannon sort of broke down the economics that he's for. He specifically, explicitly designated Ayn Rand style capitalism as something he is opposed to. And, you know, definitely he is a man of the populist right. We're going to talk all about him, and we want to know what you think. So leave a like and start super chatting and commenting in the chat. I'm here with, you got a guy who could maybe someday be fortunate enough to play Steve Bannon in a movie, by which I mean he'll be fortunate because he'll be told, gain a bunch of weight and have fun doing it. It's Mark Pellegrino.
What's up, man?
Not much other than coming up with great movie casting ideas. And we've got a guy who, I don't know, who would he even play? So one of you tell us in the chat. It's Nikos Rucka.
Thank you. So 2 reasons to talk about Bannon. First, I've been doing a lot of reading about him lately, and he's a fascinating person. He's the type of guy whose good version would be useful for every movement. Why? Because he's a guy obsessed with changing the culture. As we'll see, he wants to change the culture in a way which is significantly worse from whatever you thought till now. But at the same time, he's a guy who understands how societies and the world and history change. And it starts with ideas. It doesn't start with politics. That's why he didn't last long in actual politics. The second reason is that many conservatives have the following idea, that the West is in decline, capitalism is decline, capitalism is under attack by the left, and there is this wall that stands between the West and its decline, and this wall is this new type of populist conservatism, the countercultural conservatism, the new right, however you want to call it. And my main goal today is to show to you that this is not the case. Actually, Steve Bannon, his ideology, his self-confessed ideology, is consciously and clearly against everything that we understand as the West, as modernity, or even as the American exceptionalism or Americanism or the American ideal, or however you want to call it. So Bannon is way, way worse than you actually saw, and today we will prove to you why.
Yeah, and we already got a super chat from Roland 249 saying this is to help defeat the Leninists of the right. And Marilyn with $2, thank you. And Walter with €2, thank you for that. People commenting, Nikos should play Aristotle, Odysseus, however you pronounce that. I meant specifically in the scene of 2016, Trump running for president. You know, who would Nikos play? That was kind of the question.
Odysseus was away from home for 20 years. I was away from home for 16 years, so not that much. So, gentlemen, how do you want us to approach this?
That's a good question.
Shall I give a very quick historical overview of his trajectory, and then we jump up with whatever you want?
Sure.
Yes.
So, Steve Bannon, from early on, he has a career in the army, in the Navy. From early on, he's very interested in ideas. But here's the catch. What type of ideas? He doesn't read mostly conservatives or mostly even libertarians. He mostly is interested in spiritualism, in spirituality, in esoteric philosophy, in Eastern philosophy, in the ideas that have to do with the occult. And he gets more and more into this idea that there is this world which is beyond our consciousness. And he sees the problem of our time, that this world that we live today is too materialistic, which means it's based on this reality. It's based on the things that our eyes can see. But he thinks that what our eyes can see is so much away from what actually exists. So this already sets him in collision form with what we'd call modernity. So Bannon is fascinated with a stream of thought which is called traditionalism. Traditionalism, please don't confuse it with, oh, I like traditional dances, or I like how my village was 50 years ago. Traditionalism is a movement that is opposed to all the main elements of modernity. It's opposed to the idea that we can understand the world mostly with our reason. It's opposed to the idea that there is only this material reality, and it's also opposed to the idea that the individual is an end in himself. It has a very weird relationship with free will. Traditionalism thinks that history moves in circles, and these circles are determined by strong personalities, by strong men. And we live in times where weak men are ruling. You might have seen this famous meme, strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. This comes actually from traditionalism. Now, traditionalism, which had as its guiding figure a guy called René Guénon, who was actually a convert of Islam. Why? Because Islam offers a refuge from the materialism of the West. At some point in the 30s, gets infused with right-wing right-wing politics. Why? Because of a guy called Julius Evola. So Evola says, fascism gives us a glimpse of hope, because with fascism we have these strong men who want to reverse this cycle, who want to send us from the time of where the slaves are ruling to the time where the warriors are again ruling. Now, of course, Evola had a more spiritualist view on fascism, so he didn't bond well with Italian or German fascism. And more recently, the figure which is mostly related to traditionalism is Alexander Dugin. So to begin with, let's keep this in mind. The type of ideas that Steve Bannon is admitting that he finds exciting are ideas which have at its center that the West and the Western way of life and the Enlightenment and capitalism are things that are to be considered as bad, are things that are to be surpassed. And we need to make a leap forward to the future by returning to a pre-modern mentality, philosophy, society. Now, this is not the same with primitivism, but it's more like the pre-modern ethos. Throughout the time, Bannon, as he's developing these ideas, he gets involved in business. He's doing very well. He works in Goldman Sachs, and then he works in Hollywood. He's an investor, to put it simply, in Hollywood. And this has a second very important influence of him. He understands that culture is where the game is played. So he's trying to fuse now his traditionalism. He's trying to fuse this idea of how to get over this materialistic empire of nothing, to put it this way. He wants to transcend this, but at the same time, he understands that this needs to be done via the people. And this is how he becomes excited with populism. So traditionalism on the one side and populism on the other side, which means the common man versus the elites, the common worker versus the elites, ergo his left-wing politics, his left-wing economic policy against globalization, for protectionism. And one last thing. And this is how he meets Trump. He takes over Breitbart in 2012 when Breitbart actually unexpectedly dies. Then he meets Trump and he tries to put all this together. When his career with Trump gets to a stop, he's then trying to influence traditionalist politicians in other countries. So he has some impact on Bolsonaro. Make sure that Bolsonaro, for example, puts as his foreign minister a guy who is close to these ideas. And of course, he is in contact with European politicians who also share this vision that the problem is liberalism, that the problem is what they call globalism, that the problem is that we are supposedly ruled by the men of material aspiration, by the merchant, by the banker, by the capitalist. And what's his view on capitalism? And I'll pause with that. For Bannon, capitalism is good only up to the extent that it helps enrich the nation. So capitalism creates more wealth than the planned economy, and this is why we can tolerate capitalism. But philosophically, capitalism is to be dismissed. As Rucka said, in an interview in 2014, in a speech he gave to some students in the Vatican, he says there are two types of capitalism. Capitalism that is good for everyone, and then, as he called it, quote, the libertarian type of Ayn Rand capitalism, which puts at the center your individuality. And your individuality is bad because, as Dugin, who is someone that Bannon admires, as Dugin told us, individualism roots you out of all the groups that you are part of. Your country, your family, your tribe, however you want to call it. So individualism bad, and capitalism, at most, it is to be tolerated only as long as it works for the common good. So that's a quick overview of Bannon. So I'll pause here.
So given the fact that so many of these values are similar to the left, essentially, why do you think that it's worse?
Why do I think that it's worse?
Yeah, it seems
First
like
of all, I think that it's worse because people thought that Bannon is someone who is a defender of the West. But he's not, because he's not a defender of what we call modernity. He's a self-proclaimed enemy of modernity. He's a self-proclaimed supporter that we need to overcome this focus on the material reality and link ourselves with the transcendent. He never tells us what exactly this means. So if you are someone who thinks that whatever we call the Enlightenment or the West needs to be saving, and you ally yourself with Bannon or with anyone near that milieu, you are up for a very bad surprise. You are allying with your enemies, basically.
Yeah, but still, what makes it worse? Because the intellectuals on the right are going this way, right? The guy who wrote that book on the psychology of totalitarianism, he's gone that way. Dennis Prager's gone that way. They reject the Enlightenment. They reject individualism. They hold the essential concepts of rational individualism as the reason why we're falling into this nihilism, cultural nihilism right now. And they're looking backwards in an attempt to, reestablish, some form of spirituality beyond the material realm that they think will be our actual anchor. Why is that worse? Now, you're saying it's because they're supposed to represent individualism and capitalism and free markets, but instead they're traitors to the concepts. We already know this now. They're explicitly abandoning these ideas. So in essence, they're the same as the left. So
you mean why they're worse than the left? I haven't got an opinion who is worse, but it doesn't matter to me. They're both bad, and I want people to understand why also they are really, really, really bad. It was a shock to me. When I figured out that Bannon had admiration for Dugin, a guy who says that individualism needs to be removed from the stage of history, a guy who thinks that liberalism is worse than fascism and communism. And he's a guy that Bannon openly says, I love it. I read The Fourth Political Theory, great book. So to me, although I was studying Bannon for long, understanding how bad he is at his core, his ideas at his core, this tells me something. Imagine if tomorrow we learn that, there's this guy who is an objectivist, but he's a great admirer of, of Kant. You need to tell people, look, guys, this guy is not what you think it is. This guy is something else, and he's fooling you. If I come here and tell you I'm an objectivist, and at night, I fantasize about the proletarian revolution, I'm BSing you. And this is what I think Bannon is doing to people when he says that he's for the West or make America great again or whatever. First of all, he doesn't believe. Actually, let's hear from Rucka, and then I'm going to tell you what he thinks about America as an idea.
I'll take this moment to steelman what I think a populist Bannon fan might say. He would say, the leftists are the real fascists. They don't want religion. They just want us to worship the state. They want everything to be about the state, and that replaces God, and that's real fascism. The populist right, on the other hand, people like Bannon, they would say, they want the state to provide everyone with a job and with some basic necessities. And beyond that, we turn to God and the church for our spiritual direction. So we don't worship the state. That's how I think a pro-Bannon person might say, he differentiate him from the left and say he's not a fascist, whereas the leftists are.
Yeah, first of all, if you're a Christian, you have to be a bit skeptical about traditionalism. Traditionalism takes more from polytheistic religions of the East rather than from Christianity. Actually, there are many traditionalists, though not all of them, who believe that Christianity is the beginning of all bad things because of its universalism, because of the idea that there's one type of, we're all basically the same. So first thing there. Second, if the problem with the left is this apotheosis of the state, seeing the state as something very important, what about the traditionalist right, who sees the state as the incorporation of the fate of a community? So Dugin, for example, when he talks about freedom, he makes it explicitly clear he doesn't mean individual freedom. He thinks individual freedom is a plague that needs to be kicked out of the scene of history. He says freedom is a nation, and the nation is more with the narod, the Russian thing, which it means it's not just the state, it's a wider community being free to pursue its destiny. Now, who is going to tell you, who is going to decide what is the destiny of a narod, of a nation? Therefore, you definitely, if you are a proponent of these ideas, you want a strong man. You need a Putin, you need a Mussolini, you need someone who is going to tell you what is your fate as part of that nation. Remember, these people explicitly reject the idea that you as an individual can break from these communities and you can do whatever you want. No, you cannot do things that go against the common good, they tell us. And by the way, the National Conservatives agree with that. So I would challenge someone who says that this is more of an anti-statist view. Bannon will talk about the state being a problem when it interferes too much in the economy, but at the core of his ideas, he's a strong collectivist, and it's impossible to be a collectivist at the end of the day without being a statist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as time passes, we see the right picking up everything that the left kind of cast aside. So the leftists these days, they emphasize social pressure a lot more, and the gender stuff and stuff like that, as opposed to the right, which are increasingly moving towards wanting to use the state power. So they're into statism. It's just they want the state to basically be religious, enforce family values and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a bit selective to even say that the right are speaking out against statism. They're generally moving towards the statism in a lot of their rhetoric, and you can thank a lot of the alt-right for that. A lot of these Groyper, Nick Fuentes types people who maybe the alt-right started off as like libertarians. They're like, hey, look, we're libertarians. We're just we're sneering at the left, but within a short amount of time, they're basically saying, theocracy would actually make more sense. It would benefit the nation, theocracy, as it would give us order, as opposed to this decadence of materialism, consumerism, and gender queer stuff. So yeah, got a super chat. Marilyn with $2 says, philosopher kings, is Bannon a sort of Platonist?
I'm not sure, but it has to lead to that. It has to lead to that. How else do you know what's your destiny as a Russian, American, Iranian? By the way, traditionalists have a huge crush on Iran. Dugin has a crush on Iran as it is today. Other traditionalists wanted to revert to a more nationalist Persian type of stuff. Why again? Because of the spirituality, because of the anti-materialism, because of it's something different to the West.
Dude, it's 1930 all over again. I feel like we're headed down that track. The two opposing sides it's a war between collectivists of, not essentially different types, but certainly of degree and orientation, but collectivists nonetheless. And we're put in this false dichotomy. And there's no real liberal alternative out there. None.
It is pretty shocking. Right. It is shocking to see the word liberal has become a dirty word. It's become basically a disparaging word among most people, most political forces. And it's ours, as fans, as advocates of individualism, to pick up and properly reclaim.
So let me repeat for the guy that Bannon admires. Liberalism is worse than fascism, and liberalism is worse than communism. And he says this explicitly. It's not an interpretation. Half of his book, The Fourth Political Theory, half of the book of Dugin, is saying this time in all different forms. Liberalism is worse than fascism and communism. It's actually the biggest enemy, the worst thing humanity has ever experienced.
Yeah, this is something that virtually everyone agrees about now. The leftists, the postmodernists, right? They think liberalism, it's just white supremacy. You know, the language of liberty, the Enlightenment, all of that was just a way for white men to gain power. And that's what it resulted in their view. And of course, the reactionary right, they can't wait to throw liberalism in the trash because they see it as bringing about all the problems in the world. Robin, the member, says Nikos could play Alexander Dugin if he grows his hair and beard more. So that's your cast. And I guess that leaves me to play Ben Shapiro. So let's do this. Let's see if Daily Wire will produce this, since they love picking up appropriating objectivist projects so much. Maybe we can make this happen.
By the way, allegedly, but with very strong evidence, Bannon has actually met Dugin in 2018 in Rome. And the first words that Bannon told him was, imagine what Washington would say. I mean, the capital, not the guy, Washington. Imagine what Washington would say if they would see this. And he's right.
I mean, the Overton window has been moving so fast. It's hard to believe. Like, we got into just when the Ukraine war began, it was kind of unthinkable that anyone with prominence would be on Russia's side. And within a short amount of time, people have definitely downplayed the atrociousness of Putin and, emphasized their suspicion of Zelensky. Marilyn with $2 says, does Bannon see Trump as a useful idiot?
So Bannon sees Trump as a man that can disrupt this circle of time. He sees it as someone who can throw a bit of chaos. But chaos, for traditionalists, has a double meaning. We live in times of chaos, therefore chaos is kind of counteracting chaos, to put it this way. So Bannon never believed in Trump as an intellectual or as a clever guy, but he believed in Trump as a guy who is doing things. And remember, in the first days of Trump's presidency, Trump put in some key positions some people that were Bannon's choice. I remember actually the first episode of Michael Malice's show, or Michael Malice was someone else. Literally the day when Trump won, he said something like, keep an eye on who Bannon will suggest for key positions, particularly in things that have to do with education, because this guy understands education. And if I were a leftist today, I'd be much worried. I think he put that person, Betsy DeVos, I think. But again, because of his erratic character, all the choices of Bannon for Trump's administration, they didn't last long because no one lasted long close to Trump. Let's say, before we end, when we're done with the super chats, let's say also something about how Bannon views the United States, though.
Okay. Would you like to say that now?
Yes. Okay, we can say this now. So what is special about Americanism, the idea of Americanism, that the United States, and this is something that Rand emphasizes, is first and foremost an ideology. It's not a country that comes because people happen to live there. It's a country built on an idea. It's the first country in history built on an idea. Bannon thinks this is a horrible, horrible narrative. This is a horrible way to view the United States, because he says this plays in tune with what liberalism tells you, that we are all individuals with rights, and here's a country that understands this. And also, says Bannon, this means that the United States have the self-righteousness to try to impose this ideal abroad. Because if this is a good idea for one country, it's a good idea for all countries. And this creates this universalism and this imperialism that for Bannon are quite bad. Now, there's a very good case to be made against a country wanting to impose its ideology abroad with guns. First and foremost, because it's destructive for the country itself, usually. It's sacrificial, to put it in these ways. But that's not Bannon's problem. Bannon's problem is that this creates this idea that liberalism is this universalist philosophy. So Bannon offers a different view of the United States, which is the United States are exactly like all other countries. People who are bound by soil, by common history, by common ancestors, and by common traditions. So interestingly, the guy who wants to make America great again has a view of America which does not see it as anything particularly special in the history of humanity.
Well, that just shows me how far the right has fallen away from abstraction, philosophy, conceptual principles and have just mired themselves in pragmatism and, you know, the immediately perceptual. That's their rebellion against the abstract left, and it leaves us with nothing.
What's interesting is that, like, today's right wingers, they're like the Republican is like parties like the party of Obama, you know, because Obama, he was not big on like the identity politics. He occasionally said some things that, you know, upset people, but for the most part, he was into economics and he was into, you know, stuff like that. He, you know, tried to push the medical field as far towards towards socialism as he could in his context. And that's today's Republicans for the most part, as far as I can see. They want to nationalize stuff and break up big companies, and they want socialism. They don't want the gender stuff taught in schools, etc. They don't want that type of leftism. Yeah, it's been very kind of fascinating and disheartening to watch the new right basically morph before our eyes from the time they emerged from, like, basically people speaking the language of individualism and so-called libertarianism into actual status. I remember Lauren Southern, who first appeared as a libertarian in the culture. Within a year or so, however long it took her, I remember her tweeting out, "Libertarianism sounds great, but we need to have something more that we kind of turn to, that we like, you know, as a country, as a nation." And, you know, she was being informed by like actual Platonists, explicit status people who think, you know, the average person is not smart enough to make their own personal decisions. I once posted something related to Ayn Rand online, and someone commented, he said, Ayn Rand just wanted to trick the goyim into a pointless libertarianism so that then, you know, the corporations and the business and the banks can, basically, he was saying Rand, the Jew, tried to sell individualism to the average non-Jew so that Rand and her fellow Jews could, you know, have control of, business and banks and, you know, government, presumably. So, like, you can sort of see the Marxist elements, the suspicion of business, the suspicion of capitalism, all kind of blending with this sort of conviction that we need something bigger than the individual, and kind of where that leads, not anywhere positive.
And Lauren Southern interviewed Dugin with intellectual awe, like, that, what a great person I'm interviewing. And again, Dugin, I did a whole episode in New Idea Live, so I don't want to say much more. But again, ask yourselves, why would supposedly people who love the West, who love the United States, find an intellectual ally to someone who explicitly tells you, I want to destroy the West, I want to destroy liberalism, and that the United States, as the head of this globalist horrible beast, is something that needs to be destroyed? Let me know how you can justify this.
I think those of you who, well, people like Tucker Carlson would answer, well, I don't love the West. I love, you know, family and values and, you know, a certain degree of freedom, and liberalism is a threat to that, he would say. You know, he goes, I'm fighting for the way of life that me and other good people love. So basically they see liberalism as the problem.
So parochial and scary. I think people, after watching this show, should get the impression that the monsters are at the helm right now, and the real people, the folks who can change things, are sitting below decks in third class. Let's bring them up on top and rise and throw these monsters overboard.
And one last thing, if you love your way of life, if you want to live your life unobstructed by other people, you should be in favor of what the West stands for. You want to live in a farm, alone, uninterrupted by other people, or having a big family, or eating grass-fed meat, more power to you. But the solution is not to embrace an ideology that tells you that you're a pawn in some bigger scheme, or an ideology that tells you that the fact that you have chosen for yourself what are the values you should go after is something which is bad. And you should be linked, you should be tied, whether you want it or not, with millions of other people, and you should all have a clear destiny. So if you're a cultural traditionalist, interestingly, This is a choice that affirms your individuality. These are my values. This is what I want to do. So then you should be even more eager to defend the idea that your life is yours. And before we finish, let me give some bibliographical references.
Okay.
Okay, so for Bannon, the best overview of his worldview is perhaps his interview in 2014 in the Vatican. It's probably still on YouTube. There was a book out recently which is called War for Eternity. War for Eternity. The Return of Traditionalism and the Rise of the Populist Right by Benjamin Teitelbaum. Also, you can check the episode in New Idea Live I did with Zimovich a couple of weeks ago. There's one more book about the traditionalist right that it's 5 meters away. So fill the time for 3 seconds till I bring it.
Okay. Emmanuel with $10 says, I used to think the right were imperfect allies, but listening to this show and doing research has changed my mind. The cavalry isn't coming. It's up to us to fight for liberty. Yeah, not only the right, but the libertarians are not allies, as we've seen. They become populist Tucker Carlson fans before our eyes without an adult in the room.
So a good book that includes stuff on Dugin and on Julius Evola is this, The Key Thinkers of the Radical Right by Mark Sedgwick. It's more of an academic book, whereas the other book by Benjamin Teitelbaum, War for Eternity, it's more like a fast read. Also, go check out the episode I did with Zimovich. And if you want a first-hand take on Dugin, go read his 4th Political Theory. You can't find it anymore on Amazon because Amazon stupidly is hiding these books as if they're too intellectually dangerous. And I mean, they are, but people should still judge for themselves. But it's available elsewhere. And mostly because until you see it with your own eyes, you might say, oh, this is the agenda of the globalists. This guy cannot be that bad. Go and read for yourself and draw your own conclusion if you want.
Yeah.
And one last thing, irrespective of the topic, last week, Mark released a very good video on environmentalism. And I watched it and I tweeted, it's so difficult in 5 minutes to put together the essence of a philosophy. But Mark has done it very well. So it's part of his series. What's the name of the series, Mark?
Reality Check.
Reality Check. So check it out. It's on his Twitter. It's one of my last tweets as well. Or go to YouTube, put Mark Pellegrino Reality Check, and you will see his last book, his last video on environmentalism. This is how it's done. Condensed, 5 minutes, pop, why something is bad. You go at the gist. That's how it should be done.
Yes. And shall we return to the chat before we wrap? Tom, the member, says a podcast mentioned that Bannon thinks the Pilgrims were the best of America. Wouldn't surprise me if he did say that, if Bannon did say that.
We'll just skip the part where they hanged 19 people and pressed somebody to death because they thought they were witches.
Well, maybe those witches sound like leftists to me. I mean, they were at least lesbians. Marilyn with $5. That was a joke, everybody. Sorry, that's not the time and place. Marilyn with $5. Thank you for that. Ashley with $1.99 says my Ben Shapiro impression makes her happy.
Well, our goal here is to make you happy. Thank you.
My Andrew Tate is even better. Sparkling water.
That's not a bad Tate impression.
Thank you. Grisha with $10 Canadian says Ayn Rand's view of America applies to the U.S. before it had a standing army and the 1947 National Security Act. Google, Apple, and Facebook are owned by the state via Inqutel, INQTEL. They're state enterprises. Woo. Now that's a can of worms at the last minute here. I don't think we'll have time to voice our disagreement to the full effect, but is there anything you guys could think of saying about that?
I think after,
too much to unpack, and no time to unpack it.
But quickly after the revolution, the Articles of Confederation, there was a conservative backlash. That's what brought our government as we know it today. But we still carried the essential elements of liberalism all the way, I think, into the early 20th century, the end of the 19th century. So I think her analysis is wrong.
And by the way, the national conservatives think that the worst thing that happened to the United States early on was this utopian or unworkable Jeffersonian stuff. So they were in favor of this strong, the more strong state parts of the early American history. For more details, read Hazoni's Conservatism Rediscovery.
Yeah, and
And,
let's not forget that the Republicans, the Jeffersonian Republicans, had control of the White House and the Congress for quite a while because their ideas really did resonate with the American people. So it was basically Jefferson up until after Jackson, with a little interruption of John Quincy Adams. But for the most part, they were Jeffersonians.
And Grisha adds that he or she is not a conservative. Well, I'll just point out, whatever the problem is today in terms of the overstepping of government or the governments, manipulating the economy or owning more than they should, etc. Our solution here is to divorce the government from the economy, and to have capitalism and to have a proper military with a particular purpose and have the government protect individual rights. Whereas virtually everyone else's solution to everything is to nationalize, give the government more control, and have much, much less capitalism. So I'm not sure if whether or not we can agree about what's taking place right now, to what extent the government controls Apple. I hope we can maybe agree that the solution is capitalism and individual rights. Coming up at 7 p.m. UK time, it's the Briefly Objective premiere with Harry Binswanger, titled To Be or Not to Be, The Fundamental Choice. Then at 9 p.m. UK time, it's Ask Harry Anything with Harry Binswanger. All right, get your questions ready and see you there. Thank you all for joining us today. Really looking forward to the Steve Bannon biopics starring a much, much heavier Mark Pellegrino. Stop at In-N-Out on your way home today.
My pleasure.
And Nikos, congratulations on playing Dugin. Better brush up on your Russian or whatever he speaks. And of course, I'm ready to play Ben Shapiro, so I don't even have to memorize a script. I'll just get up there, get on camera, and just start riffing, and it'll probably fit the plot. Thank you all. See you back tomorrow for the Daily Objective, and goodbye.
Peace.